she's got a slightly fat belly. I never
Well,
use
I got his
that.
pockmarks, you know.
You think he dominates you? In your
Joking.
real life?
In 1963, Cleopatra made headlines for all the wrong reasons. The most expensive film ever made nearly bankrupted a studio. An affair between two married stars scandalized the world. But behind the tabloid frenzy was Elizabeth Taylor, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, living a life far more dramatic than any movie script. From child stardom to 8 marriages, from near-death experiences to becoming the highest-paid actress in the world, her story goes deeper than most people know. This is the hidden life of Elizabeth Taylor from Cleopatra, the child who never asked for fame. Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor was born on February 27, 1932, in London to American parents. Her father, Francis, was an art dealer. Her mother, Sarah, had been an actress before marriage. When war threatened Europe in 1939, the family moved to Los Angeles. Elizabeth was 7 years old. Sarah Taylor hadn't forgotten her own theatrical ambitions. She saw in her daughter an opportunity to live the life she'd never had. Elizabeth was strikingly beautiful even as a child, with unusual violet-colored eyes that seemed to change shade depending on the light. Sarah enrolled her in dance classes and began pursuing auditions. At age 10, Elizabeth was cast in There's One Born Every Minute at Universal Pictures. The studio dropped her contract after 1 year, saying she couldn't sing, but MGM saw something different. They signed her, and in 1944, at age 12, she starred in National Velvet, playing a girl who trains a horse to win the Grand National Steeplechase. The film was a massive success, earning over $4 million and making Elizabeth a star. But childhood stardom came at a price. While other girls her age were playing with friends and going to school dances, Elizabeth was on set from dawn until evening. She had tutors instead of classrooms. Her adolescence wasn't her own. It belonged to MGM, which controlled every aspect of her life under the notorious studio system. The first marriages. At 18, Elizabeth married for the first time. Conrad Hilton Jr., heir to the Hilton Hotel fortune, seemed like the perfect match. The wedding in May 1950 was lavish, funded by MGM as publicity for the studio's star. Over 700 guests attended. Elizabeth wore a satin gown designed by Helen Rose, the same designer who would later create Grace Kelly's wedding dress. The marriage was a disaster. In her 1988 memoir, Elizabeth wrote that Hilton became sullen, angry, and abusive, both physically and mentally. The abuse was so severe that she suffered a miscarriage. After just 8 months, she filed for divorce. She was 19 years old and already disillusioned with the fairy tale she'd been sold. A year after her divorce, Elizabeth married Michael Wilding, a distinguished British actor 20 years her senior. He brought stability and calm to her chaotic life. During their 5-year marriage, they had 2 sons, Michael Jr. and Christopher. But as Elizabeth's career skyrocketed, Wilding struggled with being the less successful spouse. He couldn't accept that his wife was the family's primary breadwinner. They divorced in 1957, though Elizabeth always spoke fondly of him afterward. Mike Todd and devastating loss. In February 1957, just weeks after divorcing Wilding, Elizabeth married Mike Todd, an entertainment producer 25 years her senior. Todd had won an Oscar for producing Around the World in 80 Days, and he showered Elizabeth with extravagant gifts, jewelry from Van Cleef and Arpels, meals flown in from Paris, constant displays of wealth and affection. Elizabeth later said Todd was one of 2 great loves of her life. In August 1957, they welcomed their daughter, Elizabeth Frances, called Liza. The family seemed complete. Elizabeth was happy in ways she'd never been before. On March 22, 1958, everything shattered. Mike Todd was killed when his private plane, the Lucky Liz, crashed in the mountains of New Mexico. He was 50 years old. Elizabeth was supposed to be on that flight, but had stayed home with a cold. The guilt and grief nearly destroyed her. She was filming Cat on a hot tin roof when she got the news. Studio pressure and Todd's substantial debts forced her back to work just 3 weeks after his death. Years later, she would say that acting was the only time she could function during those horrible weeks. She became Maggie, the character she was playing, because being Elizabeth was too painful. The scandal with Eddie Fisher. In her grief, Elizabeth turned to Eddie Fisher, one of the most popular singers of the 1950s. Fisher had been Mike Todd's best man at their wedding. He and his wife, actress Debbie Reynolds, had been close friends with Elizabeth and Todd. They were considered America's sweethearts, the perfect couple. Fisher left Reynolds for Elizabeth. The scandal was enormous. The public, which had sympathized with Elizabeth as a grieving widow, turned on her. She became a homewrecker in the eyes of millions. Reynolds herself later admitted that she'd sent Fisher to comfort Elizabeth after Todd's death, never imagining he wouldn't return. Elizabeth and Fisher married in May 1959 in a Las Vegas synagogue. In Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes, a 2024 documentary featuring archival interviews, Elizabeth was brutally honest about the marriage. She said she never loved Eddie, that it was one big, awful mistake. The only thing they had in common was Mike Todd. She'd been keeping Mike alive by talking about him with Fisher, but there was no real foundation for a relationship. In 1960, Elizabeth converted to Judaism. Although both Todd and Fisher were Jewish, she insisted the conversion wasn't because of them. She'd wanted to do it for a long time, finding comfort and dignity in the ancient religion. Her conversion led to her films being banned in several Arab countries, and she was initially barred from entering Egypt to film Cleopatra. Cleopatra, the film that changed everything. In 1958, 20th Century Fox began developing a Cleopatra remake. They wanted a modest-budget film to help recover from recent flops. But producer Walter Wanger had bigger ambitions. He wanted an epic, and he wanted Elizabeth Taylor to star in it. Taylor agreed, with conditions. She demanded $1 million, making her the first actor ever paid that amount for a single film. She also got 10% of the film's gross profits and insisted on shooting in Todd AO, a widescreen format for which she'd inherited the rights from Mike Todd. Fox agreed to everything. Production began in England in September 1960 under director Ruben Mamoulian. Within weeks, everything went wrong. The English weather was terrible, constantly destroying the expensive sets. Elizabeth, who'd been healthy, suddenly fell ill with what seemed like a cold, but the cold became a fever, and the fever became something much worse. On November 13, 1960, Elizabeth was diagnosed with meningitis. Her fever spiked to 103 degrees. She was hospitalized, and production shut down indefinitely. By early 1961, her condition had worsened dramatically. She developed pneumonia. On March 4, 1961, she stopped breathing. Doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy, cutting into her throat to insert a breathing tube. It saved her life, but barely. The resulting scar on her throat would be visible in some shots of Cleopatra. Lloyd's of London, which had insured the production, paid out $2 million to cover her medical expenses. Mamoulian resigned. The entire production was scrapped. Fox moved everything to Rome and hired Joseph L. Mankiewicz to direct. They recast Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Peter Finch and Stephen Boyd, who'd been cast in those roles, had moved on to other projects. Rex Harrison became Caesar, and a Welsh actor named Richard Burton was hired to play Mark Antony. Principal photography finally resumed on September 25, 1961, at Cinecittà Studios in Rome. Mankiewicz was writing the script as they filmed, sometimes finishing pages just hours before they were needed on set. He worked day and night, taking amphetamine injections to stay awake, wearing gloves because he'd developed dermatitis on both hands from the stress. Elizabeth's wardrobe for the film cost over $194,000, which included a cape with appliques made of 24-karat gold. She wore 65 different costumes. The production created 26,000 costumes total and built 79 sets. The budget, originally planned at around $8 million, exploded to $44 million, equivalent to over $425 million today. It became the most expensive film ever made at that time, and it was threatening to bankrupt Fox entirely. The affair that shocked the world. Richard Burton had seen Elizabeth at a Hollywood party in 1953, but sparks didn't fly until they met on the Cleopatra set in 1962. Burton was married to actress Sybil Williams, his wife of 13 years. Elizabeth was still married to Eddie Fisher. Neither marriage was happy, but neither had planned to end them. Burton later wrote in Vogue that when he saw Elizabeth on set, she was so extraordinarily beautiful that he nearly laughed out loud. She was, he said, too bloody much. Their chemistry was immediate and undeniable. They began an affair that they made no effort to hide. The paparazzi descended on Rome. Photographers followed them everywhere. The scandal made international headlines. The Vatican issued a formal condemnation, calling their relationship erotic vagrancy and stating it was an insult to the nobility of the hearth. There were calls in the U.S. Congress to bar them from re-entering the country. Burton's wife, Sybil, was devastated. Fisher called his house one day, and Burton answered. When Fisher asked what he was doing there, Burton's response was crude and brutal. Elizabeth later admitted they'd tried to resist kissed each other. Her marriage to Eddie was over, she said, but they didn't want to hurt Sybil. But the attraction was too strong. They fell completely, consuming, destructively in love. The affair wasn't just tabloid fodder. It affected the production. Mankiewicz had to manage two stars who were obsessed with each other while trying to keep the film on track. The Vatican's denunciation meant that when they filmed Cleopatra's entrance into Rome, thousands of Catholic extras were on set, and security feared an assassination attempt. Elizabeth was terrified, but when she rode through the arch, the crowd broke through the barriers shouting, "Bazio Liz," wanting to kiss her, not hurt her. She broke character, crying and blowing kisses, and the scene had to be reshot. Filming wrapped on July 28, 1962. Further reshoots continued into early 1963. Elizabeth was granted a divorce from Fisher on March 5, 1964, in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. 10 days later, she married Richard Burton in a private ceremony at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal. She wore a yellow chiffon dress designed by Irene Sharaff, who'd done costumes for Cleopatra. The aftermath and the film's fate. When Cleopatra finally premiered on June 12, 1963 at the Rivoli Theater in New York, Elizabeth and Burton were noticeably absent. Elizabeth later said they'd just had it with Cleopatra by then, the whole thing. It had been the most chaotic time of her life. The film itself had been butchered. Mankiewicz's original cut ran 6 hours. He wanted to release it as 2 separate films, Caesar and Cleopatra, followed by Antony and Cleopatra, each running about 3 hours. But Fox executives, desperate to recoup their costs and capitalize on the Burton-Taylor scandal, refused to wait. They cut the film down to 4 hours for the premiere, and later reduced it further to just over 3 hours for general release. Elizabeth attended a charity screening in London and was devastated by what she saw. She said they'd cut out the heart, the essence, the motivations, the very core, and tacked on all those battle scenes. It should have been about 3 large people, but it lacked reality and passion. She found it vulgar. Despite the scandal, or perhaps because of it, Cleopatra was a commercial success, earning $40 million in its initial release. But that wasn't enough to recoup the $44 million production cost, plus an additional $13 million in distribution and marketing. Fox lost money on the film that had nearly destroyed them. Only The Sound of Music, released in 1965, saved the studio from bankruptcy. Cleopatra was nominated for 9 Academy Awards and won 4. Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Visual Effects, and Best Costume Design. Rex Harrison received a nomination for Best Actor. Elizabeth and Burton were not nominated, though many felt they deserved recognition. Burton and Taylor, The Volatile Union. Elizabeth's marriage to Richard Burton became the stuff of legend. They were dubbed Liz and Dick by the media. Burton adopted Elizabeth's daughter Liza, and also adopted Maria, a German orphan whose adoption Elizabeth had begun during her marriage to Fisher. Together, Elizabeth and Burton lived a jet-set lifestyle, spending millions on furs, diamonds, paintings, designer clothes, travel, food, liquor, a yacht, and a private jet. They made 11 films together after Cleopatra, including Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in 1966, for which Elizabeth won her second Best Actress Oscar, but both were drinking heavily. They fought constantly, earning the nickname the Battling Burtons. Their arguments were legendary, and so were their reconciliations. After a decade of marriage, they divorced in June 1974. Burton moved on almost immediately, but he and Elizabeth couldn't stay apart. They remarried on October 10, 1975 in Kasane, Botswana, but their second marriage lasted less than a year. They divorced again in July 1976. Despite the divorces, they remained close for the rest of Burton's life. Elizabeth signed a 1982 birthday telegram to him. "Love you very much, your double ex-wife Elizabeth." When Burton died in 1984 at age 58, Elizabeth was devastated. She attended his funeral and later said she wouldn't give up 1 minute of her time with Richard Burton, despite all the rough times. The later marriages. After her second divorce from Burton, Elizabeth married John Warner in 1976. Warner was a politician who would later become a U.S. Senator from Virginia. They married on his farm in Virginia without witnesses. Elizabeth wore a violet cashmere dress under a tweed and fur coat with a matching turban. The marriage lasted 5 years before they divorced in 1982. Elizabeth's eighth and final marriage was to Larry Fortensky, a construction worker 20 years her junior. They met in 1988 when Elizabeth checked into the Betty Ford Center for treatment. Fortensky was there too, and they fell in love during treatment. They married on October 6, 1991, at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. Close to 200 high-profile guests attended, and 13 paparazzi helicopters circled overhead. The wedding cost nearly $2 million. Her dress, a gift from Valentino, cost $25,000. The marriage lasted 5 years. Fortensky later admitted the spotlight was too much for him. He'd never gotten used to the cameras, the constant attention. Elizabeth said he'd stopped working, which put strain on their relationship. They divorced in 1996, but Elizabeth left him $800,000 when she died in 2011. The woman behind the legend. Elizabeth Taylor's life was defined by extremes. She was one of the most beautiful women in the world, but she struggled with her weight and appearance throughout her life. The public saw perfection, but Elizabeth saw flaws. She battled weight gain, particularly after her back injuries and health problems made exercise difficult. The media scrutinized every pound, every wrinkle, every sign of aging. She endured it all while maintaining her career. She was the highest paid actress of her era, commanding unprecedented salaries, but she'd never wanted fame. It had been thrust upon her as a child. From age 7, when Sarah Taylor began dragging her to auditions, through her teenage years at MGM, Elizabeth had been shaped by other people's ambitions. The studio controlled what she wore, who she dated, even what she weighed. They loaned her out like property. When she finally gained power over her career, she wielded it, demanding that $1 million salary for Cleopatra, negotiating unprecedented profit participation, refusing roles that didn't interest her. She married 8 times to 7 men because, as she once said, she couldn't just have a romance. Her puritanical upbringing and beliefs meant marriage was the only acceptable path. She thought she had to marry anyone she loved, and she fell in love easily, mistaking passion for lasting commitment. Each time she believed it would last forever. Each time she walked down the aisle with genuine hope, and when it ended, she grieved, recovered, and tried again. Critics called her a serial bride, but Elizabeth saw it differently. She was an optimist who never stopped believing in love. Her relationship with her children was complicated. She had 4 children, Michael and Christopher from her marriage to Wilding, Liza from her marriage to Todd, and Maria, whom she adopted. Christopher told The Hollywood Reporter that growing up, he and his brother could play with their mother's Golden Globes but not her Oscars. Elizabeth was devoted to her children but also devoted to her career, and balancing both was never easy. She missed school plays and birthdays because of filming schedules. She brought them on set when possible, but movie productions meant months away from home. Her children grew up watching their mother be worshipped by millions while sometimes feeling they had to share her with the world. Michael Jr. became an actor and artist. Christopher worked in film and television editing, later becoming a successful artist. Liza struggled with addiction and legal troubles, facing challenges that Elizabeth understood from her own battles. Maria, adopted as an infant with severe disabilities, received Elizabeth's devoted care. The children's relationships with their mother were loving but complex, shaped by the unusual circumstances of growing up as Elizabeth Taylor's children. Beyond her acting and her marriages, Elizabeth became known for her AIDS activism. In the 1980s, when AIDS was stigmatized and funding was scarce, Elizabeth used her fame to raise awareness and money. Her close friend Rock Hudson died from AIDS-related complications in 1985, and his death galvanized her. She co-founded the American Foundation for AIDS Research that same year and established the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation in 1991. She testified before Congress, demanding more funding for research. She organized star-studded fundraisers, leveraging her Hollywood connections. She visited AIDS patients in hospitals when many people were still afraid to touch them. She fought against the stigma, using her voice to humanize those suffering from the disease. She raised hundreds of millions of dollars for research and care, using her celebrity for a cause she believed in passionately. When asked why she devoted so much energy to AIDS activism, she said simply that her friends were dying and nobody seemed to care. Elizabeth also battled her own health problems for decades. Beyond the near-fatal pneumonia during Cleopatra, she suffered chronic back pain from a fall from a horse during National Velvet. She had numerous surgeries on her back and hips. She developed skin cancer, which required surgery. She had a benign brain tumor removed in 1997. She broke her back 5 times throughout her life. The pain was constant, and she became dependent on prescription painkillers, checking into the Betty Ford Center multiple times to get clean. Elizabeth Taylor died on March 23, 2011, at age 79 from congestive heart failure. By the time of her death, she hadn't been married for 15 years, the longest period of her adult life without a husband. She'd lived on her own terms, made her own choices, loved fiercely and often unwisely, and created a legacy that extended far beyond her films. The American Film Institute ranked her 7th on its list of greatest female screen legends. She won 2 Academy Awards for Best Actress, appeared in over 50 films, and became one of the most recognizable faces in the world. But the hidden life of Elizabeth Taylor, the girl who never wanted stardom, the woman who survived near death and heartbreak, the activist who fought for the marginalized, the complicated person behind the violet eyes, was always more interesting than any role she played. Cleopatra was just one chapter in an extraordinary life. It nearly killed her, it made her more famous than ever, and it brought her the love of her life. But Elizabeth Taylor was always bigger than any single film, any single marriage, any single scandal. She was, as Richard Burton said, too bloody much, and that's exactly what made her unforgettable. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.